Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to the best day ever because we're talking about That's exactly right? Great job today in class. I think y'all absolutely killed it. Y'all were engaging with the story. You were getting really into it and stuff like that. But we left off in class talking about Gaius Julius Caesar. He's been kidnapped by pirates. He's become consul. He's formed the first triumvirate, right? So the big thing about it, though, in general, is we left off basically talking about the fact that Caesar had entered into a political alliance with these three key figures, right? We've got Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, right? So remember, though, in general, Caesar and Crassus like each other. Crassus and Pompey hate each other. Pompey and Caesar hate each other. So why does Pompey get to be in this alliance at all, right? Well, the big thing about it, though, is remember all of their roles, right? We've got Caesar right here, the guy who wants to become consul. We got Crassus right here, the Mr. Wooderson of the group, that is the richest man in all of Rome, that wants a lot of his ideas actualized. And then we've got Pompey right here, the former assistant of Sulla, which Caesar absolutely hated. But the big thing about it, though, is Pompey is an optimate. Pompey is one of the senators. Pompey is one of the guys that you need on this alliance if you're going to be able to get anything done, right? Due to the fact that you need Pompey's ability to go out there and actually get people to agree with Caesar's role, to get people to agree to vote for Caesar. So they basically had an enemy in their alliance, right? It's going to be the only way to actually really pull it off. But Pompey, though, big thing you also have to understand, to seal the deal between him and Caesar, Pompey is going to go off and marry Caesar's daughter, right? So Pompey marries Caesar's daughter. They end up like getting married, staying together for several years. But the big thing about it, though, in general, Caesar is going to use these other two guys to get himself elected consul in 59 BC. He uses them to get elected consul because, remember, his father could never do it, right? His dad never pulled off become consul, so Caesar wanted to be the ultimate ruler of Rome on his own. Now, we talked about that whole situation, how there are two consuls in ancient Rome, but, the other one got something poured all over him that was really gross. But the big thing about it, though, is that we also left off in class talking about that as consul, Caesar was a popularity, right? People loved him and his alliance because they directly helped the plebes, right? He tried to give land directly to poor and veterans. He created this Florence, he literally created an entire city for them known as Florence in the county of Tuscany that was dedicated to the veterans of foreign wars, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is the Senate, though, over time is going to grow to hate him, right? Guys like Pompey and Pompey's friends are going to grow to hate and despise Caesar because he's ruling unilaterally, right? He's ruling on his own. The other consul is hiding in his house, Marcus Bibulus and stuff like that, and is not coming out anytime soon due to the fact that he is embarrassed because he's literally gotten a big, giant bucket of something dumped on him. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is that as these senators are growing to hate him, the big thing about it is at least we still have Pompey, right? At least we still have Pompey to keep those people calm, keep them quieted down, and allow Caesar to keep ruling, right? But a lot of senators are saying, well, he can't do this. He's ruling like a king. He's passing all these laws without consulting us. No. And so they're growing to hate his guts. But remember, very important thing, how long does a consul rule for? They only rule for 1 year, right? So in 59 BC, it would have been the year of Bibulus and Caesar, right? But the big thing about it is he only gets 1 year. And after that, you can't run for another consecutive year. So the senators decide to send him out to govern over several different provinces and try to see if he's really up to snuff, right? The big thing they do is they send him out to govern this place called Gaul, right? Gaul is in modern-day France. It's out towards this direction as well. Now, he didn't just go out there. He also went to Alpine Gaul at one point. He went out to Asia Minor at one point and a couple other things like that. But his main governorship was out towards Gaul. Why would the senators want to send him out there? Why do the senators care about sending him to Alpine Gaul and stuff like that, or just sending him to the other Gauls over in France? The big thing about it is they think he might die, right? The Gauls are a very aggressive tribe, very aggressive warrior group that are very well known for charging into battle in the nude and also cutting people's heads off and stapling them to their huts, right? The big thing about it, though, in general, is they thought that if Caesar goes out there, Caesar might lose a couple of battles and he might end up dead, right? So the big thing about it, though, getting into it, is you have to also understand that Caesar, though, being the absolute amazing, ridiculous, just dude of dudes that he is, he just goes out there and takes over all of Gaul anyway, right? Goes out there, takes over the entirety of Gaul, does what he wants to, rules over Gaul, the king of the Gauls, named Vercingetorix, surrenders in front of him, throws his sword down on the ground, and submits to Caesar. He has a giant triumph parade in Rome yet again, and they kill Vercingetorix, the Gaul leader, in the form of strangling him to death. And the whole thing about it, though, in general, is that everything the senators start throwing at Caesar after his consulship, he just keeps doing. He keeps winning over and over and over again. But then something bad happens, right? Something to challenge Caesar truly really goes down. The first triumvirate is going to start to fall apart. Why? Because of two reasons. One, the first triumvirate starts to fall apart because Crassus, the richest man in all of Rome, goes out to fight towards Anatolia in Turkey against these group of people called the Parthians, and he ends up getting captured and executed by the people he goes out there. Ooh, yes, Crassus is dead! And Crassus was the glue that held the first triumvirate together, right? The glue that held them together with his money and his influence and his power. Because remember, Caesar and Pompey don't like each other, right? Caesar is only going into this agreement so he can become consul and get the commissions that he wants, right? The big thing about that as well is that Pompey was Sulla's right-hand man. Caesar and this guy hate each other. And now without Crassus, it's a lot of big problems. And Crassus was also killed in a really screwed up way. Crassus's head was cut off by the Parthians, and then they filled his empty head with molten gold because they said he was obsessed with money, right? So, that is so screwed up. Now, the biggest thing about it, though, in general as well, getting into it, is that also something insane is going to happen. Caesar's daughter is going to die in childbirth. So now Pompey, the reason he's agreeing to being there with Caesar was the agreement between them was the daughter, the marriage to the daughter, and now she has died, right? That is going to be a terrible blow to this alliance, and Pompey is going to turn on Caesar. He's going to turn on him, and he's going to declare Caesar an outlaw, right? And he says that no general is allowed to march over a very important river, right? That river is known as the Rubicon River. The Rubicon is right up here towards the northern area of Rome. And he says no soldier, no general is allowed to bring a legion over that Rubicon River. And the thing about it getting into it that you need to understand is that while this happened, they were like, Caesar also must return to Rome by himself and stand accountable for the crimes of which he's committed against the Republic and also while he was consul. So they're threatening him. And Caesar knows for a fact that if he goes back to Rome alone, the senators are going to have him arrested, and they're going to kill him. What else would they do, right? They're not going to sit there and be like, all right, we're going to have tea time. We're going to discuss why you didn't do what we wanted you to do, right? So the thing about it is that Caesar is stuck at this Rubicon River. He's standing at the edge of the Rubicon River with his several legions of soldiers behind him. Thousands of troops are standing behind him, and he's on the edge of the Rubicon River. And to his right, he's got a very, very important figure, a man by the name of Mark Antony, right? Mark Antony, his second-in-command general, who is a plebe and also a man that Caesar trusts unconditionally. And Mark Antony looks over at Caesar and says, "Sir, what are we going to do?" And then Caesar just looks back over at him. He's like, "They told me not to cross this river." And he drops the reins, and he starts walking across the river anyway. Crosses the Rubicon River, and then motions his soldiers to follow after him. That's right. Caesar is marching on Rome with an army to go and take it over by force. What a guy. Literally, he is literally marching on Rome to go down there and take it over on his own. Mark Antony looks at Caesar and goes, "Sir, what are we doing here? Can we turn back?" And Caesar looks at him and goes, "Alia iacta S," which means the die has been cast. He's basically saying, look, I already threw the dice. It's over. We're marching on Rome, right? He marches down onto Rome. Pompey recruits an army, and a civil war breaks out between Caesar and Pompey. And they just start clashing and fighting against each other in 49 BC. And the big thing about it, of course, who's going to win? Caesar is going to win. Literally looking at this map really quick, the fighting started in Rome. Every time Caesar would win a battle, Pompey would just kind of fall further and further and further into Italy. And he kept retreating and kept retreating and kept retreating. And Pompey's forces kept losing and losing and losing. And then eventually Pompey runs away to a very all-important place. He runs away to Egypt because he knows that a certain group of people are in charge over in Egypt. The Egyptian crown, he knows if he gets all the way over there, that he'll be able to recruit some forces under the king Ptolemy the 15th, right? And he knows that under Ptolemy, he'll be able to get some more soldiers, get some bread, get some stuff, and be able to go back to Rome with an Egyptian/Roman army and maybe beat Caesar at his own game. Ptolemy says, yes, of course, come on down. Come on down and talk to me, right? We'll talk to you about getting you an army. Pompey then walks off the boat, steps foot in Egypt, and all of a sudden, a sword goes boom and comes out of his chest, and he has been stabbed in the back, right? Skewered by an Egyptian soldier, and Pompey collapses down to his knees and is coughing up blood. He's like, why? And then literally the Egyptian soldier takes him by the hair, grabs his sword, and slices Pompey's head off of his soldiers. And that is why you don't mess with Caesar. Caesar already talked to the Egyptians before he ever even showed up. And the thing about it is they then take Pompey's head, they put it in a basket, they send it back to Caesar, right? They send it back to Caesar, and literally he opens it up like it's an Amazon Prime shipment. He's just like, oh, what's it that? And he actually had no idea that they were going to cut off his head. Caesar was actually planning on pardoning Pompey and all this other stuff, which is wild. Caesar then goes down to Egypt, and do me a favor, write down, Mr. Terry's got to tell us the Egypt story, all right? Caesar actually went down to Egypt at one point and met a very famous woman by the name of Cleopatra, who's going to come up again here in a little bit in the same flip. But be like, Mr. Terry's got to tell us the Egypt story. Mr. Terry's got to tell us the Egypt story because I can't sit here and ramble to you for 10 minutes on a black screen, right? But the big thing about that you need to know is that Caesar went all the way down to Egypt, made some alliances with the Egyptian queen and king, right? The queen being Cleopatra, the king being Ptolemy. Made some alliances with them, has Cleopatra installed as the ruling pharaoh queen and things like that, and then eventually returns to Rome after defeating Pompey in this civil war. Now, getting into it, though, Caesar, when he comes back, is going to be appointed dictator because of the very large civil war that had broken out. Caesar gets appointed dictator also after that multiple different times. This is angering the Senate, right? Because they're mad. The plebes love him. He has returned from Egypt to cheering crowds of people that are obsessed with him. He has another triumphal parade, his fourth triumphal parade, and he's riding through the streets of Rome, and the senators are growing very weary of this because they're like, he's been elected dictator for 10 years, right? He's been elected dictator for 10 straight years, even though the war is over. And the plebes love him because he's a strong leader. He creates more jobs. He's expanding citizenship to conquer people, allowing them to vote in elections. And the senators are just sitting there right now going like, what are we going to do? They're just mind blown by the fact that they literally have lost a war against him. That Pompey has lost a war against him. That Pompey's head is in a basket after trying to run away to Egypt and all this other crazy stuff. And he also crossed the Rubicon when he wasn't supposed to do it. So getting into it though, the Senate feels like this. And men are going to start getting together. 60 senators start getting together to conspire to murder him because they feel they are losing power. And the two leaders of this senatorial conspiracy are men by the name of the following. Write these two names down. They're very important. Underline it, circle it, star them, okay? Their names are Brutus, B-R-U-T-U-S, and Cassius, C-A-S-S-I-U-S. Brutus and Cassius are two senators that start a conspiracy to have Caesar murdered, right? They want to kill him, they hate him, and also Brutus especially hates him because Caesar is hooking up with Brutus's mom, which is a whole other thing, right? We'll talk about that in class. But the big thing about it, though, in general, is then that is when the worst event happens. In 44 BC, 5 years after Pompey is dead, 5 years after the civil war against Pompey, 5 years after he crosses the Rubicon, Caesar was appointed dictator perpetua, which means for life. He was appointed dictator for life, and the Roman Republic was becoming a dictatorship. The senators feared he was going to make himself king, even though he had proved he didn't want to. At the ceremony where they elected him dictator for life, Mark Antony, his assistant, the guy that was standing next to him at the Rubicon River, goes to hand him a crown, a laurel wreath crown like this one that I have in my hand right here, to put on top of his head and become king of Rome. And Caesar looked out at the people, and the people were hushed. And they were looking at him. They were like, is he going to put it on his head? Is he going to put it on his head? Is he going to put it on his head? We don't like kings in Rome. We don't like kings in Rome. But Mark Antony was offering him a crown to become king of Rome. Caesar took the crown, and he threw it down and said, the only king of Rome is Jupiter. And the crowd went wild because he knew the people of Rome well enough to know they didn't want him to be king. they wanted him dictator for life because Rome doesn't like kings, right? But the thing about it is, though, is that the Roman Republic is now a dictatorship. The senators are all freaking out. And then on March 15th, 44 BC, an event known as the Ides of March, because literally the word Ides means middle of, and so that's why it's March 15th, the middle of the month. So getting into it, they literally are known as the Ides of March, and 60 senators came to a meeting with daggers hidden under their togas. And as Caesar was walking down before he was about to go on an excursion to one of the other territories, walking down for one final meeting in the Senate before he went off on his military campaign, he's walking down the stairs and a blade is drawn and a man stabs him in the back. And they're sitting there, and he just gets stabbed in the back. Hence where the word backstabber comes from, right? They're stabbing him in the back, and they just begin maliciously stabbing him over and over and over again. And 17 of them all got blows in, and they stabbed him over and over and over. And he's laying on the ground, and he's trying to defend himself. Caesar pulls out a pencil, an actual stylus pencil, and he starts trying to stab at their feet, trying to defend himself and stuff like that. And he's trying to help himself out, and he literally looks up. And according to Shakespeare, he never actually said this. He looks up and just goes, "Et tu, Brute," and then and then they literally stab him to death and kill him inside of an important place. He dies inside of a building that Pompey had built, a building known as the Theater of Pompey. And as sitting at the base of a statue of Pompey, he's looking up at Pompey as he's being stabbed for the final times, and he's killed on the 15th of March, 44 BC, because they feared he would be too powerful. Looking at this entire thing, you have to understand that that is a huge moment in history. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip in this other flip that I made, because y'all are about to be coming into class any second now. And I'm having a lot of technical difficulties with a lot of this stuff. But we're actually going to clip in another flip that I've made before, and I'm going to wrap that thing in, and then we'll pick up where we left off in class at the end of that flip, all right? Y'all are doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work. I'll see y'all in a sec. Yeah, take that, Kelsey. Fix y'all done. Now, anyway, big thing, though, is the Empire period is going to begin after the death of Caesar. Now, you'll notice the date says 29 BC, and then Caesar was stabbed in 44 BC, so you're like, come on, Mr. Terry, 15 years went by before this started. Well, a lot of stuff happened between those different time periods, right? And it all has to do with this guy, right? This guy is going to rise to power, and who this man is Caesar's adopted son, but mainly his grandnephew, right? So one of his sisters gave birth to this man, or down the line or whatever. He's related to Caesar by blood, but he's his nephew, right? And this guy's name is Octavian Caesar, right? So what ends up happening during this moment is that the senators, like Brutus and Cassius, were expecting that the people of Rome were going to be excited that they had killed this man because he was making himself a king. But what ended up happening is a riot broke out in Rome, and a small civil war started raging of pro-Caesar people and anti-Caesar senators, creating armies and fighting against each other, right? So what ends up going down, though, is this dude, his name is Octavian, apparently in Caesar's will before he died, was adopted as Julius Caesar's son. Now, a lot of this is believed to be the fact that since Julius Caesar was elected dictator for life, he would have maybe wanted to establish some type of hereditary rule. Hereditary meaning that he needed a son to take over the throne after he died, but since he didn't have one, he adopted his grandnephew, Octavian. And again, Octavian is very dope, and he looks like this, right? So Octavian is a very intense figure in history, and he becomes the first emperor of Rome, right? Octavian would be adopted by Gaius Julius Caesar, and he becomes like his son, right? So in this entire process, though, following the death of Julius Caesar, Octavian returns to Rome during one of these crazy civil wars, right? During this civil war, Octavian comes back into Rome. He is called in by the senators because they're thinking to himself, oh, we'll send Octavian out, who is his grandnephew, who we think we can convince to fight for us, to go and destroy Caesar's armies, right? Caesar's armies are being led by a very important person, Mark Antony, right? Mark Antony is leading the pro-Caesar army, and they're actually up in northern Italy, camped out, right? So the Senate believes that Octavian will help them win this war because of their distant relationship, and also because they think Octavian is a pushover, right? They actually believe that Octavian was going to just do whatever the senators said because he wanted money or power or whatever, and so the Senate brings him in, and they're like, go fight Mark Antony and beat your adopted dad's army, and then restore power to the Senate, right? Well, what ends up happening is Octavian marches up there and goes up against Mark Antony, and after a small battle, Octavian decides, wait a minute, is it a smart idea for me to try and destroy my father, my adopted father's right-hand man? Maybe I should listen to what he has to say. So after a small battle that was pretty inconclusive, Octavian and Mark Antony got together and met one another and discussed some things with each other, and they decided, rather than fight each other, they should both assemble their armies together and march back on Rome and take the fight straight to the senators, right? Take it to the senators that killed Gaius Julius Caesar and dethrone their power and take back over, right? And this entire time, Brutus and Cassius are still alive, and they're living out in Greece in exile, right? So Octavian and Mark Antony march on Rome and take it over using a hit list, right? Because a big thing that you got to remember is Caesar always was running out of money and had a tremendous amount of debt. So Octavian wanted to create a system to where he could raise a bunch of money to pay off his uncle's debts, or excuse me, his adopted dad's debts, pay all that stuff off, and also use it as a way to make money for himself. So him and Mark Antony actually created a list of names and put bounties on them, and they were all senator families that would have conspired to kill Julius Caesar. See what I'm talking about here? Krista was right in class. Julius Caesar was smart, but his nephew / adopted son, Octavian, might have been even a little bit smarter sometimes, right? Octavian was like, oh, what we'll do is we'll give away like 300 talents for every time you kill one of these families. But where will their property, their money, and all of their bank accounts go to? It will actually be seized by the Roman state, who is being headed up by Octavian and Mark Antony right now, right? It's the best fundraiser ever. Like Octavian and Mark Antony ended up making a wild amount of money off of it. And then in this process, Octavian, as we know, is Caesar's grandnephew, formed this thing known as the Second Triumvirate, right? So the first triumvirate was Julius Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, right? And since that thing fell apart and then put Caesar in power and then Caesar ends up dead, Octavian creates the third triumvirate, or excuse me, the second triumvirate. No, the third triumvirate is me, Mr. Mathern, and Mr. Waterson. Just a heads up. Octavian, though, creates the second triumvirate, which includes an alliance through a three-way dictatorship, right? So what they did is these guys got together and they were like, look, to bring Rome back to peace, like, I will rule this section of Rome, Mark Antony will rule this section, and then we'll give another section to this guy named Marcus Lepidus, who is, like, invalid and not that important, right? Marcus Lepidus, like, has some boats, and, like, he did some stuff, and, like, he went off and fought Sixtus Pompey, Pompey's son, and stuff like that. But, like, Marcus Lepidus is just like, so Marcus Lepidus got, like, North Africa and Carthage is just a bunch of rocks and stuff that nobody wants, right? So, basically, it was Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Lepidus. Now, anyway, so the second triumvirate, though, takes over as a three-way dictatorship. And what they decide to do to earn the trust of the Roman people, as well as to assert themselves as the new ruling party of Rome, Octavian and his new buddies decide that they're going to go out, they're going to capture and find Brutus and Cassius and defeat them in open combat, right? So Octavian and Mark Antony march their armies out with Marcus Lepidus to go destroy Brutus and Cassius, the two guys that conspired and killed Julius Caesar, right? And what ends up happening after a lot of crazy stuff, they end up winning, right? And at the Battle of Philippi, it was actually a major moment. Brutus and Cassius both end up killing themselves, and then actually Octavian ends up winning, even though ironically enough he wasn't there, but it's one battle and blah, 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 blah. But in the process, Octavian has a bunch of people like sacrifice and then also like holds Caesar up as like a god, right? Because crazy thing happened is after they won, they had all these people that they had arrested. Like remember that hit list I was talking about? They had them all in prison. And after Augustus, or excuse me, not yet. After Octavian and Mark Antony and Lepidus captured all those like senatorial families at a big session of games inside of the Circus Maximus, they decided to have all of them executed in front of everybody and call them human sacrifices, right? And then apparently Octavian stood up in front of everyone in the middle of this games and said, "And now my father will ascend to the heavens as a god himself." And Octavian was so smart that everybody looked up into the sky, and he had been charting the stars, and he knew what was going to happen. And a comet streaked across the sky, and he pointed at it, and he says, "And there goes Julius Caesar on its way to heaven." And the people were like, "Oh my God." Octavian, very smart guy, right? So now, in this whole process, though, what ends up happening is following Brutus and Cassius's death and following the death of all those senatorial families, the second triumvirate ended up splitting up the empire so they could each rule a third of it, right? Mark Antony would get a section, Lepidus would get a section, and Augustus would get a section. Augustus got like Rome and Northern Europe. Mark Antony got this little stuff over here to the right, and then Lepidus got this stuff right here down at the bottom, which was like close to Northern Africa, right? So in this whole issue, though, what ends up happening is Lepidus got all of his land and his armies taken away from him by Octavian. Octavian looked over at Lepidus and felt that he wasn't of use to him anymore. And he was like, I feel like there's a chance that you might end up allying with Mark Antony to come and take me over. So Octavian got a little paranoid, right? And he strips the land and the armies away from Marcus Lepidus. So now Octavian rules over Europe and Northern Africa. And Mark Antony only has this section over here to the right. Well, a crazy thing had ended up happening. Mark Antony's wife rebelled against Augustus, and he had him killed or had her killed and stuff like that. But Mark Antony went out and got himself a new wife, right? Mark Antony actually ended up breaking out after his wife's death, and he married Cleopatra. He actually married Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, and had 3 kids with her. And a war broke out between Octavian, Mark Antony, and Cleopatra, right? And the reason why this whole thing happened, though, is due to the fact that basically, Octavian felt threatened that Mark Antony and Cleopatra may raise an army with other Greeks and barbarians and other people and try to invade Rome. Well, what ends up going down at the Battle of Elaea is actually, eventually, Octavian beats them, claims Egypt as his own. Mark Antony and Cleopatra end up dead, right? Mark Antony killed himself by having his soldiers, by stabbing himself with one of his soldiers' blades. Cleopatra ends up killing herself by picking a snake up out of a basket. She's like, I can't live without Mark Antony, and shoves it onto her chest and forces the cobra to bite her, and that's how she ends up dying, right? Eventually, Octavian, though, beats both Mark Antony and Cleopatra in open combat and claims Egypt as his own, right? So basically what he has done is Octavian has put himself in a position to be the ruler of the entire Mediterranean Sea, right? And what he's becoming is the very first emperor of Rome. So Octavian became dictator in 27 BC, and he did something really goofy, and he restored this thing known as the Republic. But why do I have the word Republic in quotes? Because it's not going to really be the Republic. It's going to be Octavian's version of it. And the first thing he does when he comes to power is he has his name changed. And he changes his name from Octavian to Augustus, which means respected one. But we're actually going to pick up right here whenever you get back into class. We'll talk about some more stuff then. I'll see you guys later.